Recording in progress.
So no videos.
Age is just a number.
So yeah, your homework last week was Psalm 52, and it just had to do with David's response to what happened with Doug and the Edomite. Today we're starting right immediately after that. Pull up this share screen, share here. Okay. So we're in 1 Samuel 23. You're there yet?
You got the page one to go off or whatever that little.
I figured out a way to do it. Because I don't, before I was putting it to a presentation screen before I shared. Now I'm sharing it and then going to presentations. That's it. It's funny the way the things you learn. So okay, verse 21 of chapter 23 of 1 Samuel. And keep in mind from last week that we may be flipping back and forth between First Chronicles and stuff too. Okay, I don't think we do that today, but we might. So I didn't go over this in the last day or so. Now they told David, the Philistines are fighting against Keilah and are robbing the threshing floors. Remember that David had run off, but there were people who were joining him, and so he's got about 400 guys that have joined him at this point. And so he's in his stronghold there in Adullam. And he sent his parents to Moab. Y'all remember that? Did I mention that at all? Okay. Because they're, that's where David's grandmother is from. So our great grandmother. So he sends them there. And meanwhile, all these people keep coming to him. Well, while they're there, he gets, somebody tells him that the Philistines are fighting against this little city called Keilah, and they're robbing the threshing floors. Now, why is robbing the threshing floors important? That's their survivability. That's how, yeah. So verse 2, David inquired of the Lord, shall I go and attack these Philistines? The Lord said to David, go and attack the Philistines and save Keilah. But David's men said to him, look, we are afraid here in Judah. How much more then if we go to Keilah against the armies of the Philistines? Then David inquired of the Lord again. The Lord answered him, yes, go down to Keilah, for I will give the Philistines into your hand. So David and his men went to Keilah, fought with the Philistines, brought away their livestock, and dealt them a heavy defeat. Thus David rescued the inhabitants of Keilah. Okay. So Keilah means citadel. And so it may just be a description of the little city. Rather than a name, but we'll go with name for this point. But Saul is not doing his job. Why would the people come to David and ask him, hey, can you come save this little town? Keilah is part of, it's part of the kingdom of Israel at this point. So why wouldn't Saul do it? Saul's not doing his job. Saul is so bent on killing David that he's not taking care of his other responsibilities. So they asked David because he's got a big enough group, I guess. So you can see where Keilah is. You see Adullam right above it. That kind of gives you an idea of where they're at. Not really, because you don't know where everything else is. Hebron's probably the only other name that looks familiar to you there. But you can see where the Jordan Valley. The Jordan Valley is there compared to the desert area. That kind of gives you an idea. Okay, verse 6. When Abiathar, remember him, son of Ahimelech, fled to David at Keilah, he came down with an ephod in his hand. Ooh, what does that mean?
It's the authority of the priesthood.
Mm-hmm.
Symbol of the priesthood.
It's a symbol of the priesthood. And what would normally be in an ephod?
The law.
Well,
Priest.
Well,
It's a garment, right?
well, he's carrying it. Yeah, he came down with an ephod in his hand, so he's carrying it. Remember, he has a
white.
blackberry on his head arms. So, but he just escaped this slaughter, and he has probably grabbed the ephod from his dad, who was the head priest. So what would the head priest normally have?
Not the ark.
No.
Aaron,
The what?
the dice.
The die. Yeah, you're on the right track. The Urim and Thummim. You're on the right track. So, yeah, that's probably what is with that.
Now, what were they, the guy used for?
Those were used to discern God.
Hey, I'm going to Vegas.
Yep. Verse 7. Now it was told Saul that David had come to Caleb. And Saul said, it's funny that Abiathar finds David at Caleb. But Saul is still having to rely on other people to tell him. David had come down to Caleb. Saul said, God has given him into my hand, for he has shut himself in by entering a town that has gates and bars. Remember, Caleb means citadel. Right? Saul summoned all the people of war to go down to Caleb to besiege David and his men. So Saul is now going to Caleb, but he's not going there to save the city. He's going there to destroy David. When David learned that Saul was plotting evil against him, he said to the priest Abiathar, bring the ephod here. David said, O Lord, the God of Israel, your servant has heard that Saul seeks to come to Caleb and destroy the city on my account. And now will Saul come down as your servant has heard? O Lord, the God of Israel, I beseech you, tell your servant. The Lord said, he will come down. Then David said, will the men of Caleb surrender me and my men into the hand of Saul? The Lord said, they will surrender you. So it's going off of, David is not always made out to be, the bad guy. Occasionally he is, especially in Samuel. The fact that David took the ephod, he told Abiathar to bring the ephod here. But you notice that David didn't take it from him, but David's the one doing the talking. So what he's doing is he's asking the priest, okay, with your two die, discern whether Saul is really coming here. That's what I've heard. So red for yes, blue for no. And so he draws out the die out of the bag, the ephod, and it's blue.
So that's how he discerns what God is telling him to do. He's not hearing it, he's.
Correct. And all we're getting is the story from the person who's right. So and everything was always a yes or no question. It's only two choices. So it may have to involve several questions if you do anything. So the second question, our first question, he gets the answer, yes, he's coming down. Second, is the city that I'm in right now going to hand me over? Are they going to surrender me to Saul? And the answer again is yes. Well, that's not good. He just saved them. Why would he wonder that?
Because Saul has a bigger army.
Well, partly. I will say that some of it had to do with what happened page prior with the right here. He went to Caleb, fought with Philistines, and brought away their livestock.
Oh.
He didn't leave it for the people. It was their city. Was it the Philistines' livestock or was it the Caleb? I think it may have been the Caleb's livestock. So anyway, so they will surrender you. On to the next page. Where's my mouse? I'm lost. No, not that. Okay. Then David and his men, who were about 600, he's already gained a couple hundred people, set out and left Caleb. They wandered wherever they could go. When Saul was told that David had escaped from Caleb, he gave up the expedition. David remained in the strongholds in the wilderness, in the hill country of the wilderness of Ziph. That comes into play here in a moment. Saul sought him every day, but the Lord did not give him into his hand. So Saul thinks God's on his side, and so he goes to war with David, although he gives up here when he gets there and finds out that he's not there. And here I mentioned, remember the Urim and Thummim, he gained about 200 more soldiers, but the city was willing to give him up in order to save themselves. So David flees, Saul gives up, David hides in the land of Saul's upbringing. Remember the wilderness of Ziph? Saul is a Ziphite. His dad was a son of Ziph. So David is hiding right underneath Saul's nose. It's almost the perfect place sometimes. And that's where Ziph is. Tried to put some landmarkers from previous slides.
That's a long way.
Right. You see Hebron here. Remember where it was on the last map?
Bottom.
So way up here, this way, was where he was. But he's come all the way to Ziph in order to to live right underneath his nose. So. Verse 15, David was in the wilderness of Ziph at Horesh when he learned that Saul had come out to seek his life. Saul's son Jonathan set out and came to David at Horesh. There he strengthened his hand through the Lord. He said to him, do not be afraid, for the hand of my father Saul shall not find you. You shall be king over Israel, and I shall be second to you. My father Saul also knows that this is so. Then the two of them made a covenant before the Lord. David remained at Horesh, and Jonathan went home. So Saul seems to have all this difficulty finding David, but Jonathan found him on a moment's notice. It seems like. Being in Saul's backyard, David may have had contacts to let Jonathan know, hey, this is where I'm at. So that's why I asked, how did Jonathan know where David? So their dream of serving together here that we find here, I shall be second to you. That never happens. Spoiler alert. In fact, this is actually the last time they will ever see each other. Okay. Yet here in this these last couple of verses, they reconfirm that three-way covenant. The two of them made a covenant before the Lord, so they're making it with themselves and also with God. Verse 19. Then some Ziphites, Saul's people, went up to Saul at Gibeah and said, David is hiding among us in the stronghold of Horesh on the hill of Hachilah, which is south of Jeshimon. Now, O king, whenever you wish to come down, do so, and our part will be to surrender him into the king's hand. Saul said, may you be blessed by the Lord for showing me compassion. What an egotist. Okay, go and make sure once more, find out exactly where he is and who has seen him there, for I am told that he is very cunning. Yeah, takes one to know one, I guess. Look around and learn all the hiding places where he lurks and come back to me with sure information. Then I will go with you, and if he is in the land, I will search him out among all the thousands of Judah. So they set out and went to Ziph, the head of Saul. The word Hachilah means she is my hope. Jeshimon means solitude. Remember, these names probably have to do with some aspect of where they're at, where their location and stuff. So, Saul here has wised up. He wants to know all about that area before going. The last time they told him where he was, he went, ended up having to slaughter a bunch of priests. Then he goes to the next place to find out that he left there. So he's not about to leave his stronghold. He knows for certain exactly where David is. That's where Hachilah is. So, we saw where, here's Hebron, and David was hiding out here, just west of Ziph here, in the mountains of the wilderness there. And here he is he is kind of wandering out there, ends up at Hachilah here on the border of. This is the Dead Sea, in case y'all wanted to know. This gray stuff over here is water. That's the Dead Sea.
And that is the area of today's West Bank.
Yes, yeah. And you'll see this E over here on another slide that's coming forward. See that means En Gedi. That's En Gedi, which I'll talk about. Over here on the right side, you see that E there. The city there is En Gedi, and that plays a big, it's very, very nice trivia that I'll David and his men were in the wilderness of Baal in the Arabah to the south of Jeshimon. So pretty much the same area. Saul and his men went to search for him. When David was told, he went down to the rock and stayed in the wilderness of Maon. When Saul heard that, he pursued David into the wilderness of Maon. Saul went on one side of the mountain and David and his men on the other side of the mountain. David was hurrying to get away from Saul, while Saul and his men were closing in on David and his men to capture him. Then a messenger came to Saul saying, hurry and come, for the Philistines have made a raid on the land. So Saul stopped pursuing David and he went against the Philistines. Therefore, that place was called the Rock of Satan. David then went up from there and lived in the strongholds of En Gedi. Okay, so Maon means house of sin. Yeah, it's funny how the Arabah, that's where means dry area. That Arabia means the same thing. Okay, so it's where those come into play. David is indirectly here saved by the Philistines this night. The Philistines somehow start having a raid in the area that Saul happens to be in. So Saul has to stop what he's doing and protect his own people. So he goes up against the Philistines to protect him. En Gedi means spring of the kid, like a goat. So kid spring. So probably an area where a bunch of goat herders probably reside. Anybody know what En Gedi is famous for? It's right there by the Dead Sea. That should be
Dead
another
Sea
one.
Scrolls?
The Dead Sea Scrolls, that's where they were found. By a young boy who was herding goats. He threw a rock in a cave and hurt some pottery pattern. Right there in Gedi. So, would somebody be willing to read Psalm 50?
When the Ziphites had gone to Saul and said, "Is not David hiding on you? Save me, O God, by your name, vindicate me by your might. Hear my prayer, O God. Listen to the words of my mouth. Strangers are attacking me. Ruthless men seek my life. Men without regard for God. Surely God is my help. The Lord is the one who sustains me. Let evil recoil on those who slander me. In your faithfulness, destroy them. I will sacrifice a free will offering. I will praise your name, O Lord, for it is good. For he has delivered me from all my troubles, and my eyes have looked in triumph on my foes."
Okay. So that's just David's, I guess David in all this wandering and then resting and waiting in these caves, hills and things, he takes the time to write about what he's experienced. They use these markers, these bylines here as a marker for when he was writing. Yes.
I was just wondering offhand if that prayer wasn't a prayer for a curse,
Maybe.
Prayer for what?
for God to curse his own.
I don't. Right. Well, no, he does. I will bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you. Yeah, so he does. But because of the free will offering statement, free will offerings were usually done as either a sign of doing something wrong, making atonement for, or they were made as a praise offering. So it's usually not to, okay, God, I want to give you this offering if you curse his people. So although it may be, I don't think that's it.
But some other places in the Psalms, doesn't David say that he basically says, come down on my enemies
Correct.
and ruin them.
He does, but he's very direct about it. Okay. Well, thank you for reading that. Okay, on to chapter 24. When Saul returned from following the Philistines, he was told David is in the wilderness of En Gedi. Poor Saul.
Poor Saul.
Right. Then Saul took 3,000 chosen men out of all Israel. They went to look for David and his men in the direction of the rocks, wild goats. So how many does David have?
He had
600.
600, and here's 3,000 coming up against. He came to the sheepfolds beside the road where there was a cave, and Saul went in to relieve himself. Now David and his men were sitting in the innermost parts of the cave. The men of David said to him, "Here is the day at which the Lord said to you, I will give your enemy into your hand, and you shall do to him as it seems good to you." Then David went and stealthily cut off a corner of Saul's cloak. Afterward, David was stricken to the heart because he had cut off a corner of Saul's cloak. So what are the chances here that Saul, in that moment of needing to relieve himself, enters the one cave that the person he's trying to seek to kill happened to be? And Saul entered this cave alone.
This morning, there was a message on TV and they were talking about how God works both sides. And so this was David here.
Very good. Now, David still recognized, we asked,
Why was he, whatever, feel guilty or whatever, said David? Why was he conscious stricken? Cutting off.
That's dishonoring the king.
correct, David still recognized, one of my notes there, he still recognized that Saul was the anointed king of Israel. And
He could have killed him.
yeah, one of the signs of the royalty was your robe. And to have an incomplete row meant there was something wrong with your rain, so. So yes, I kind of laughed at, I'll get into it on the next slide, but kind of laughed at, here Saul is, they're in this cave, and what, when you talk about caves, usually there's this idea of when you talk, there's an echo and stuff like that. So I'm curious, the men of David said to him, here is the day of which the Lord said to you, I'll give your enemy into your hand, and you shall do to him as it seems good to you. See, seems like an awful lot of talking. Right, the more you talk in an enclosed space like that, the more there's a chance that you're gonna be discovered, kind of thing, so anyway, I kind of question. He said to his end, this David, the Lord forbid that I should do this thing to my Lord, the Lord's anointed, see, to raise my hand against him, for he is the Lord's anointed. So, so in the same manner, he's talking again, a lot of talking in a cave. So David scolded his men severely and did not permit them to attack Saul. Then Saul got up and left the cave and went on his way. So David reminds them of who God is and who they were in relation to God. He did not so much as scold them here. You notice, they're doing a lot of talking, but it doesn't say that David scolded them with his words. So I assume he probably shut them up and probably gave commands and to cease and desist through his, through the way he looked, and he's quiet about it. Saul hadn't left the cave yet here. So in essence, David gave his soldiers the look. I know the look very well. My mother gave it to me a lot, and my wife gives it to me a lot. Verse 8, afterwards, David also rose up and went out of the cave and called after Saul, my Lord the king. When Saul looked behind him, David bowed with his face to the ground and did obeisance. David said to Saul, why do you listen to the words of those who say David seeks to do you harm? This very day your eyes have seen how the Lord gave you into my hand in the cave, and some urged me to kill you, but I spared you. I said, I will not raise my hand against my Lord, for he is the Lord's anointed. See, my father, see the corner of your cloak in my hand, for by the fact that I cut off the corner of your cloak and did not kill you, you may know for certain that there is no wrong or treason in my hands. I have not sinned against you, though you are hunting me to take my life. May the Lord judge between me and you. May the Lord avenge me on you, but my hand shall not be against you. Basically, he's saying your life belongs to God. It is not mine to take. I'm not going to seek to kill you, but if you decide to go ahead and kill me, you've got the Lord to contend with. No. 13.
The way he dealt with Saul, that's one of the reasons. What is the saying that David was after God's own heart?
David was a man.
David was a
God.
man.
Own heart, yeah. And to me, that's just an example of that. The way he dealt with that and killed Saul. They could after it was like.
So on the 13, David is still talking here. As the ancient proverb says, out of the, we don't know where this proverb is. Out of the wicked comes forth wickedness, but my hand shall not be against you. Against whom has the king of Israel come out? Whom do you pursue? A dead dog, a single flea? May the Lord therefore be judged and give sentence between me and you. May he see to it and plead my cause and vindicate me against you. So, we talked about the ripping of the claw. This is the second time a robe has been torn. Do y'all remember the first time? When Samuel went to Saul, after Saul had taken up on the role of being priest, he had done the things he wasn't supposed to do. Samuel came and told him, the Lord is removing himself, removing the spirit from him. You're not going to be king anymore. And as Samuel turned to leave, Saul reached out and grabbed Samuel's arm and ripped Samuel's cloak. So it's never good for Saul when there's the ripping of clothes. Basically, David is saying here, if I was as evil as you say, wouldn't I have followed you with killing you? And on the page previous, we heard him call Saul my father. Well, keep in mind, David is his son-in-law, so he married Michael, Saul's daughter. So anyway, Verse 16, when David had finished speaking these words to Saul, Saul said, "Is this your voice, my son David?" Now he saw him, so Saul lifted up his voice and wept. He said to David, "You are more righteous than I, for you have repaid me good, whereas I have repaid you for evil, or repaid you evil. Today you have explained how you have dealt well with me, and that you did not kill me when the Lord put me in your hands. For who has ever found an enemy and sent the enemy safely away? So may the Lord reward you with good for what you have done to me this day. Now I know that you shall surely be king, and that the kingdom of Israel shall be established in your hand. Swear to me therefore by the Lord that you will not cut off my descendants after me, and that you will not wipe out my name from my father's house." So David swore this to Saul. Then Saul went home, but David and his men went up to the stronghold. These are some big things that Saul is saying. We don't know where Saul's soldiers are, because he went into the cave alone. So maybe he's the only one still standing there. His soldiers are off in the distance. Don't hear any of this, because those are big words for the king to say, "David, you're going to be king." And for his soldiers to hear that would be a big deal. But I want to pay attention. I say the vows for Saul's kin. Notice that he says, "Swear to me, therefore, by the Lord, that you will not cut off my descendants after me, and that you will not wipe out my name from my father's house." So he's saying that please, whatever happens to me, that the descendants of Saul will still have a line, is what he's saying. This is a big deal, considering David was promised by God that his line would continue. So
And David does fulfill.
Yeah, Abimelech.
David does fulfill it. Saul, however, doesn't here. So, correct. Yeah, we're gonna get into some weird, funny names for Saul's children. The one that ends up surviving is named Mephibosheth or something like that. So, yeah, it's funny word there. So next time Israel loses a light, David gains a wife, and Saul loses a spear and a water gun.
So Saul has David promised, but he doesn't promise anything in return. does
Well, he says, "I know you're gonna be king."
he? He acknowledges it, but he doesn't. He acknowledges it with words.
And he says, "I'm gonna let you go. I'm gonna let you go. How far be it for me to kill someone who just saved my life, who just
Okay.
let me live when I could have. So yeah, Saul doesn't promise a whole lot,
But
but
Saul could have rallied his troops.
he could have and decimated them. Sure, Saul has the upper hand with 3,000 troops versus 600. So okay. Well, thank y'all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let me shut this down here. Say hi, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.